It's time to start. Let's start with a word of prayer. Our Father, we're thankful for this time you allowed us to gather together to study from your word. We pray, Lord, as we open up your word, that you open it up to us, and that we glean from it the things that you would have us to learn, and learn the lessons that you would have us to, that you were trying to teach us. Forgive us of our sins, and all this in your Son's name. Amen. We're over here in chapter 13 of John. And if you had been a disciple of Jesus during this particular time frame, I think Peter is probably one of the disciples that you would probably not want to hang around too much.
Boy.
I'll get you, boy. Peter was blunt. He was abrasive. He was arrogant. He was filled with self-pride, you know, and he was very boastful. And sometimes we don't like being around people like that. Judas, on the other hand, might have been a disciple that you would like to hang around with. Now, now remember, you don't know that he's the traitor yet. He's not the one that's going to. But evidently, Judas had a trustworthy character. All of the other disciples trusted Judas to keep track of the purse and the collection and to delve it out and so on and so forth. Only Jesus knows the genuine character of all these disciples, and knows our genuine character. And the purpose of today's lesson is that we learn to look beneath the surface and not judge a man so much by the way he seems to be, but to look truly at his character, especially when it comes to choosing those that we would like to be, those that we would like to emulate in the church, and so our spiritual heroes. We need to be selective and don't go on first appearances. Because I'll tell you right now, I make a bad first impression. It's not so much even in the church, but in the Marine Corps, I made a bad first impression. I came off as a mean, hard-fisted a Marine. But when my Marines found out who I really was, they knew that I was an old softy. You know, I projected one appearance because I am an old softy, and people tend to take the advantage of those that they can take advantage of. So I wanted to get along as I could with them hating me. But that's another story. In order to get into the class, our discussion questions here, or our not discussion questions, discussion questions, our group discussion questions. If you knew a close friend was going to falsely betray you, and the betrayal would cost you your job, what would you do?
Throw him under the bus.
Throw him under the bus. You know, one is, so it might be a badly worded question, because we really don't know who's going to falsely accuse us. We might know who falsely accused us. So it might be a better question is, what would you do if you were falsely accused by a close friend? I'll give you all an opportunity to talk on this or discuss it. Or again, I will throw myself under the bus because I have examples of this.
So do I.
Okay, well, what is your example?
I worked for years at the same nursing home. I got really close to this lady who was upper part of the thing. I went into the office because I was in trouble, and I didn't do what they said I did, and she just sat there and didn't say a word, but she knew what kind of person I was.
Yeah. You know, I think sometimes if we are falsely accused, we might know what that individual's motivation was. And the example I want to give you is, I think I know what his motivation was. I was betrayed or backstabbed, or however you want to put it, by one of my closest friends, a fellow staff sergeant. You know, we would have, you know, it was a requirement that the commanding officer talk to all his staff and COs on at least an annual basis and tell them how they were doing. Well, during this interview, the CO with this one staff sergeant, he kind of tossed me under the bus. I was falsely accused. He said I was doing things that I wasn't doing, but he told the CO this. And I think what his motivation was, I knew things about this staff sergeant. And if I would have told the CO about these staff sergeants, that staff sergeant could have got in serious trouble. So I kind of think I was thrown under the bus so he could degrade my honesty or whatever, and whatever I told the CO, you know, the CO would probably just ignore it because he knew, or he thought he knew certain things about me. First of all, I wouldn't do that, and I didn't do that. But you know, in the long run, it really didn't affect my career because, as Marilyn said, my CO knew my character, and he knew that what was being said about me was not within my character, you know. But in how I treated this staff, I didn't treat him any differently. I treated him the same as I always would. And I don't know if he ever knew that I knew that he said things about me. And I don't know if it, no, I guess I could have told him I knew and let it eat him inside. You know, but again, I'm not that type of character. I wouldn't do that. Does anybody else have any thoughts that you want to share on this question? No. Okay, we all just like hearing Mike's embarrassing stories. And Marilyn is good. Self-reflection, and again, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Last minute thought. You know, sometimes it's better just let them do what they're going to do because they're going to do it anyway, and just get another job. I mean, know that that's what's happening, and just go get another job, because they're going to be found out for what they have been doing.
Yeah, I like the first part of your answer there. Let them do what they're going to do anyway, because you're going to see that in our story today, that's exactly what Jesus did. He let Judas, in fact, he told him, go ahead and do it. You're going to do it, do it.
They're going to do it anyway.
You're going to do it anyway. Let's get it out of the way. Go, 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 go. Mm-hmm. But again, think about this. Has someone in your life ever hurt you deeply? What was the response to him or her? Now, again, I don't expect you to answer this, but think about it. You know, how did you respond to that personal, okay, Larry.
Not well.
Not well.
We had a problem with an airplane, and they were blaming our autopilot, and I was trying to troubleshoot it. And the guy from the manufacturer came down, and he was just all over me. And got to have my job and all that stuff. And I said, well, I was looking for a job when I came here, so if you take it, have a Monday night. And I came back and wrote a scathing report about this. Well, eventually, the airplane had been miswired. They put two systems together that shouldn't have been together. But I was really hot when he got me. And I was a Christian at that time, but they just attacked my character and my capabilities. And I was doing all I could. And he was not giving me credit for anything. And matter of fact, attacking my character. So
Yeah.
that hurt pretty bad.
It hurt, and it's difficult not to take it badly. You know, but sometimes that might be the Christian way to do it, is not let you affect you so much. But then again, we need to remember we're Christians, but we're human, and our human instinct is, man, you. Let's go ahead and turn over to John 13. We started John 13 last week, and we finished off at the 17th verse. And I think, yeah, so we're going to pick up at the 18th verse. And I'm going to read all the way to the end of the chapter. Then I'll discuss what's on the board there, because I know some of you are curious about it. I do not speak concerning all of you. I know whom I have chosen, that the scriptures may be fulfilled. He who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. Now I tell you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe that I am he. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. When Jesus had said these things, he was troubled in spirit and testified, most assuredly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. Then the disciples looked at one another, perplexed about whom he spoke. Now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask who it was of whom he spoke. Then leaning back on Jesus' breast, he said to him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it. And having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. Now, after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Then Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. But no one at the table knew for what reason he said this to him. For some thought, because Judas had the money box, that Jesus had said to him, buy those things we need for the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. Having received the piece of bread, he then went out immediately, and it was night. So when he had gone out, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and glorify him immediately. Little children, I shall be with you a little while longer. You will seek me, and I said to the Jews, where I am going, you cannot come. So now say to you, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another, as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered him, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you shall follow me afterwards. Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for your sake. Jesus answered him, you will lay down your life for my sake. Or will you lay down your life for my sake? Most assuredly, I say to you, the rooster shall not crow till you have denied me 3 times. Now, before we get to the discussion questions, or questions for discussion, or evaluation questions, however you want to put it, I want to explain my drawing here on the board.
Your speedometer.
It's my speedometer, yeah. Michelangelo's drawing of the Last Supper, many of you know, was not totally accurate. First of all, they show them sitting at a straight table, and they're all sitting on a bench or in chairs or something like that. When they went to dinner, when they went to the supper, a feast, thing like that, their table was U-shaped, and they sat on one end of one side of the table, and they sat not in chairs or on a bench, but they sat in a big cushion, And the best example I could get of what it was like a beanbag. For those that remember what the beanbags were, you would sit in it, and you would be in a reclining position. Now, this is important. They would be reclining toward the left, because when the servers came in and they placed the food on the table, it was a big bowl and they had bread, they would dip into the bowl with the right hand. So they're all leaning kind of toward the left, and their feet are sitting outside the table here. Now, from what's written in the scripture here, in this thing here, we know that Judas was on Jesus' left, John was on the right, and Jesus is here. This is the table. This is where the host of the feast would sit, at this end of the table, or the place of highest honor. And on his right and on his left were the honor positions. If you remember, Jesus tells to the disciples, when you go to supper, don't sit at the high end of the table, sit at the low end of the table, so that when the master comes in, you could be honored if he honors you. I don't know if Jesus honored Judas by saying, sit here on my left. We don't know that. But I think Peter is probably the only one that followed, listened to the Lord, and sat on the lowest end of the table. So Peter is over here. Now, how do I know that Peter's over there? If we go back to last week, when Jesus washed the disciples' feet, he washed Peter's feet first. And that would be because Jesus would come over here to the lower end of the table and wash Peter's feet. And I think that it gives us an explanation, because I've had these questions before. Did any of the other disciples object to Jesus washing his feet? And the answer I'm going to think is no, because when Peter raised the objection, Jesus said, if I don't wash your feet, you have no part of me. So the others might not have liked it, but they accepted it. So Jesus went around. So Peter is over here. We also know Peter is over here by what it says in there. Peter had to get John's attention. Because Peter's way over here, and John's over here sitting next to Jesus, and you can see Peter over here getting John's attention. He's waving his arm, yelling, John, John! So there's the picture there. Now, with this picture in mind, let's go on to the questions that I have. And hopefully, maybe we can get, maybe that your answers might vary than what they would have been before. So the first question, what tone of voice do you think Jesus uses in verse 21? Verse 21 here again, he says, one of you will betray me. Jesus said, what was Jesus' tone of voice then?
Sorrowful.
Sorrowful. It was sorrowful, but it was also vocal enough that everybody in the room could hear what Jesus was saying. Jesus was saying, it was sorrowful. One of you is going to, it wasn't a proud acclamation. It wasn't even a voice of accusation. It was just a statement. One of you is going to betray me. So now, is anybody else thoughts? I want to give you all time to think and to say. Verse 26 then. What was Jesus' tone or voice in verse 26? In verse 26, he's talking to Judas. It is he whom I shall give a piece of bread when I dip it.
It's probably very quiet since
It
the
was-
others didn't know what
It
he
was very
doing.
quiet, and it was in humble, thing. Jesus dips it. And again, the others, and this answers the question. Why didn't the others know that Judas was the one? Because Jesus is very plain. It's the one I dip and hand it to. Well, Jesus is answering, and it's very dip, and he's facing toward Judas. And he might even been leaning over to Judas' ear. It's the one that I give this bread to. I accuse you. Because immediately Judas gets up and wants to leave. So going on. So Jesus' voice was probably very quiet and very, very humble and telling Judas here. I want to give you another thought that maybe you hadn't thought about. First of all, when Jesus reached into the sock and he's given the piece of bread to Judas, what kind of thoughts do you think might be running through the disciples' head?
Why was he feeding him instead of everybody dipping for themselves?
Yeah. Bill just looks like he wants to say something.
I want you to finish your.
My synopsis? Okay. First of all, dipping the bread into the host is going to dip the first piece of bread. That's a given. Because they're all sitting there and they're not going to begin eating until after Jesus starts to eat. So Jesus is going to dip the first piece of bread. I can see Jesus dipping the first piece of bread, turning to Judas, and then saying, it is he who I'm giving this bread to. He's the one that's going to betray me. I don't think the disciples thought anything of it at all. It is a custom back there. It is a show of friendship, of honor to the person. Jesus has shown Judas that I'm your friend. Here, have a piece of bread. Not only are you my friend, you're a close friend. And the reason I'm saying this, I want to say that I think Jesus is still reaching out to Judas. He knows Judas is going to betray him, yet Jesus is still reaching out to him and telling him, I love you, you're my friend. And there might have even been an impression there is, you do not have to do this. Now that's Mike's thought. Does anybody, think Mike is crazy? Bill thinks Mike's crazy. Okay, you have something to add to that, Bill?
Okay, if you look back on verse 23, it says, now leaning on Jesus' bosom was one of the disciples whom Jesus loved. And then typically that always refers to John. And then in verse 25, it says, then leaning back on Jesus' breast, he said to him, Lord, who is it?
Right.
Okay, so he's talking to the guy that is to Jesus' right, or the guy
Yeah.
John, and so Jesus tells him it's him who I'm going to give the bread to.
I think John leaned on his breast and he asked, and then he answered John's question, but he didn't give the answer to John. He gave the answer to Judas, because he dipped the bread, turned to Judas, and says, "Here, it is you." I think Judas might have heard the question, so Judas knew what the question was, and he got the answer. Now, again, the question comes up is, well, why didn't the other disciples hear it? The other disciples didn't hear it. One is because Jesus is talking quietly, but also remember what's going on in the room.
Conversation.
Well, there's conversation, but what is the conversation? Jesus had just said, one of you is going to betray me. Now, it doesn't bring it out here in John, but you turn to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and in there, and it says, in Matthew, it says, all the disciples turn to Jesus and says, is it I? Is it I? And they went around that way, and Judas said, is it I? And they all sit there, they all ask the question. But if you go look at Luke and Mark, and it says the disciples were discussing among themselves. And then you got the conversation. I know it's not me. Is it you? Is it you? Oh, you think it might be John? Could it possibly be John? They're all having this conversation, and it's, you hear the conversation in the auditorium in here. It's pretty loud. You can hear the person you're immediately talking to, and you can hear a rumble, 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 but you don't know what anybody else is saying. So there's quiet in there. So they, even if Jesus has spoken in a more vocal voice, is he who I do? They probably didn't hear it anyway. And we know they didn't hear it because, maybe we'll get to it. But let's go on with the next question. In verse 27, what's his voice? And it says, what you do quickly. Now he's still talking to Judas. Now remember, Jesus just dipped it in and gave Judas it, and Jesus is very plain. It's you. You're it. And Judas gets up. And as Judas is getting up to leave, Jesus says to him, what you're going to do quickly. What was his tone of voice then?
It was probably still quiet.
It was probably so quiet. Was it filled with disgust? He said, okay, you're going to do it. Do it. Yeah.
No.
No. It was just quiet. You know what you're going to do. You got things to do. And there was probably sadness in his voice. And then that brings up the point, why did the disciples, what did the disciples, is it the next question? Go ahead.
I don't think it was quiet, because it says none of those reclining at the table knew for what purpose he had said this to him. So they all heard it.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Everybody at the table heard this part of the interaction, but I think it was probably flat because it said they didn't know why he said it. If he said it angrily or something like that, with some kind of emotion, they would have picked up on that.
Yeah.
Because he just said, what you
Right.
gonna do?
There was nothing to give away that Judas was a traitor
Yeah.
or why he was leaving. He just says, okay, you got something to do, go do it. Be about, and that's why the disciples, let me just check, make sure it's not the next question. Okay, there it is. Evidently, the disciples did not know who would betray him. What does this tell you about how Jesus treated Judas?
Jesus obviously didn't give any indication that it was Judas.
Jesus gave no indication that it was Judas, other than leaning over to Judas and saying, okay, you're it, but, yeah, Linda.
What mine says, what you're doing. In other words, Jesus knew what he was already doing. Because he was already plotting against Jesus, and Jesus knew this, but probably none of the rest of them knew it.
Yeah,
So, and he says, do it quickly.
do it
So
quickly,
he's just telling Judas, what you're doing, do it quickly.
okay?
Because he knew what all of it, Jesus knew what all of it meant in the first place. He knew the whole meaning behind the whole thing. He knew this was planned by God. He knew this was his destiny. He knew all that stuff. So he was just saying it to Judas. And yeah, the others heard it and they didn't understand it because it was meant for Judas only.
Yeah, Judas is getting up and Jesus sits there and says, okay, what you're doing, go ahead and do it quickly, it needs to be done. And that's why the disciples, okay, that's the next question, I'm ahead for verse 3, so I want to go up to verse 3. Question 3 says, how do the disciples interpret Jesus' instructions to Judas in the verse? And then we can
And I think that's why he got up and left immediately because
I think he
Jesus
got up
told
and
him to
left
do it
immediately
quickly.
because
Because
because Jesus sit there and for all Judas knows at this particular moment that Jesus' next statement is going to be to the disciples. This is he. Look at it. He's running away.
his guilt was probably getting to him in the first
His,
place.
I think his guilt was getting to him. I'm not sure that his initial attention when he got up. I think he was just wanting to get out of the room. And then Jesus says, "What you're going to do? Go ahead, do it. Do it.
Well, when Jesus handed him the bread and gave it to him, the next verse says, after this, Satan entered him. So, Judas was already in process of doing this. It was an ongoing thing. Jesus knew what the finality of it was going to be. So when it says after this Satan entered him, it's not that he just at that point he suddenly decided he was going to go.
No,
betray him.
the decision was made.
I think that when it says that, I think that what it means he gave up any pretense of being a disciple at that point. He was in action against Jesus at that point, rather than pretending not to be.
Right, John.
You think that maybe the disciples were confused because it says, as soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered him. And then Jesus said, what you're about to do quickly. Do you think Jesus was talking to Satan? And they were confused because Judas was reacting to
I didn't think that, but maybe it was. He's definitely talking to Judas, but but Satan hasn't entered Judas's heart. I want to say that. Now, again, I'm not saying this is true, but I want to say that Judas really hadn't made up his mind he was going to do it. I think it was one of these things, he's thinking about it, I could get some more money here, and then we mentioned before that, I forgot what we mentioned before. Must
Well,
not have been for.
Think of it from Judas's perspective at that point. He knows that Jesus knows.
He knows that Jesus knows that he's been thinking about it. But I think, do you ever do this? In your mind, do you ever think in your mind about doing things that you really never have any intention of carrying those duties out?
They're called intrusive thoughts.
Intrusive thoughts. Maybe at this point, Judas only had intrusive thoughts up until Jesus made the accusation and then Satan entered him. And again, I think that was a very good point. I think Jesus knew that Satan was there at that time. And Jesus might have been talking to Satan. Just as in the example when Peter says, I will never betray you, or you don't need to do, I don't remember what the quote was, but Jesus turns to Peter and he talks to Peter, Satan, get thee behind me. Get behind me, Satan. And so Jesus, so maybe, yeah. Don't ever never let your brain deteriorate today. My brain has deteriorated. Because thoughts just go in and out like butter. Judas. Okay, let me look at the questions again. Okay, first of all, okay, let's go back to 2. What does this tell you about how Jesus treated Judas?
Treated him no differently than
He didn't treat him any other way.
Same way.
Rose.
He had already covenanted with them for 30 pieces of silver, and then he was looking for an opportunity. I don't remember which book it's in, but
Yeah, I sit there. You probably have to look back at one of the other Gospels to get that. So he might have already been doing it. He might have already struck a bargain for the price. But Jesus doesn't treat him any differently. He treated him as one of his own because he was one of his own, and he lost it. And again, okay, to the question: how did the disciples interpret this? When he told Judas, "Go do what you're going to do,"
They didn't know what he was gonna do.
they didn't know what he was going to do, John.
I mean, it sent him off. They thought he went for more bread and more of this, more of that.
Yeah.
It's his job because he's the
He's the man with the
man for
purse.
money. Yeah.
Maybe they were running out of bread. Maybe Judas ate the last piece of bread. I doubt if he ate the last piece of bread. But the feast, there was other things needed. Maybe Judas is going to go get this, or he was going to give some money to the poor. Maybe they had already arranged to give some money to the poor, and and that's why the disciples would think this. They're not thinking anything derogatory about Judas at this particular time. They're thinking that he's going on and he's doing what Jesus asked him to do. Whatever it was, give money to the poor or go get more supplies or whatever. And Judas would be the one to go because Judas is the one with the money purse.
He tells Judas that you're going to be the one that betrays me, but everyone at the table was confused, not only because they didn't know who would betray him, because it wasn't just one person that was going to betray him. Because Peter betrays him later in the same day. Betrays, same thing.
Yeah.
Throwing someone under the bus.
Yeah.
Is betrayal.
the same thing. That's maybe a different debate, yeah.
And one has, I think it shows 2 different sides, because one was forgiven and the other one didn't believe he could be forgiven.
Right. Good point. Can we apply Jesus' example to the way we should treat our betrayers, or was this a unique situation that really does not apply to us today?
We can and we should.
Yeah.
We don't know it.
We don't. We're not very good at it.
Again, that goes back to our discussion. Larry said, how did Larry behave? Larry behaved badly. It's human to behave badly. And again, that's a lesson. That's a lesson we can learn. That's a lesson we can pursue. We can pursue. I hope I'm using that word correctly. To be more like Jesus and to be able to treat others. Like I said in my example, when I was betrayed by my fellow staff sergeant, he had no idea that I knew he betrayed me because I treated him the same. I saw a hand go over here, John.
Well, isn't one of our commandments to love thy neighbor as yourself? And if you aren't showing kindness, you're not being kind to yourself. So you shouldn't treat your betrayers any differently from others.
We don't treat them any better. We don't treat them any worse, John.
It's possible that Jesus was able to do this because he could see the good that would come out of it, even with the way it was going to be portrayed to the rest of the disciples. Judas betrayed him, leading to Jesus' death, but without that betrayal, Jesus would never have rose again, giving salvation to those around him.
We can argue that point, but and Judas was the one that was going to betray him, and Judas is the one that did betray him. But I like going back to my argument where I said when Jesus is showing Judas that sign of friendship, I think Jesus is still reaching out to him, and I can sit there and say, Jesus, here's the true answer to the question, or at least the answer to mine. if Judas didn't betray him, Jesus was still going to go to the cross, and he would have been betrayed by somebody else. Because that's what was out there.
Like many people, I'm a lot better at giving advice than taking my own.
Yeah.
And I've had this conversation with others. I had it with my wife before when she was upset about something that somebody in her family had done. I said, why are you upset when they're doing what you expect them to do, what you know they're going to do, how you know they're going to act? You love them anyway, so why are you upset over this?
You know,
Now, of course, I don't react the same way, but my advice still is valid.
you know, the answer to your question, why were you upset? I think Jesus was upset. He definitely wasn't happy about it. But, you know, but again, he had to do because it was something that he, I'm sorry,
It said Jesus was troubled in spirit too, because he's like, one of you is going to be.
he was troubled in spirit before he even said it. He was troubled in spirit, upset.
He was just a lot better at.
So your wife has a reason to be upset, but how she goes from there, maybe she can still invite him to dinner or whatever. I don't know what wives do. Next question. What is new about Jesus' command in verse 34? Again, his command is love one another. His new command is love one another. What he says this is a new command. What is new in this command?
Well, he says, as I have loved you.
You love one another as I have loved you. What was, and Dale, maybe it was Dale, maybe it was somebody here on this. What was the old command about love?
Love your neighbor.
Love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, you know, and I believe that command is still in effect. Love your neighbor as yourself, or as you would want to be loved. But now we have this command: love one another.
Mike, it's beyond that. It's love one another as I've loved you.
As I have loved you.
And I think that goes beyond love your neighbor as thyself, because we treat ourselves pretty bad sometimes, and we have fairly low opinion of ourselves sometimes. But Jesus is saying, no, this isn't just for your neighbor, and this isn't how you treat yourself. You treat each other as I've treated you.
You treat each other as I have treated you, John.
Well, you know, it also goes back to he knew Judas betrayed him, but he still treated him like one of the disciples.
He still treated him as one of the disciples. Jesus still loved Judas.
Even when he knew.
And when he knew. And that, you know, and at this point, that tells you how much Jesus loved his disciples. Y'all need to stop twitching, because every time I see a twitch, I think I see a hand going up.
Mike, can I jump in here?
We're not hearing from this side of the room.
If I'd known that, I'd sit over there. Well, listen, I went to John chapter 17, where Jesus was praying, and he said in verse 12, he says, while I was with them in the world, I kept them in your name. Those whom you gave me, I have kept. And none of them is lost except the son of perdition, that the scriptures might be fulfilled. So, the question there that was raised there, if it hadn't have been Judas there, it probably would have been someone else. This, he says, that the scriptures might be fulfilled.
Yeah.
See, so,
yeah, so
he was going to go to the cross.
He was going to the cross. The scriptures were going to be fulfilled.
Yeah, sure.
You know, and Linda.
Why do we hate somebody in the first place?
Exactly. Why?
Because it's an act usually.
It's an act.
Is it usually an act that they've done that made you hate them for some reason? Because there's got to be a reason why you hate somebody.
No.
You can't just hate for the fun of it.
I'm not saying, sometimes there's a reason, if it came to a family member and there's one family member that you really didn't like, because I'm sure there was some sort of betrayal. But when it comes to hate,
you don't always need a reason.
I think people will hate certain things for no reason. They don't need a reason to hate you.
Well, a lot of people hate them because they've been taught.
They've been taught to hate
Right.
you.
Well, that's.
And if you don't educate yourself there, that's ignorance, you know, then you still remain there.
Why did Hitler and the Nazis hate the Jews?
But they thought
Their only reason was because they were Jews. You know,
If you really think about it, that's really not even a valid reason.
it's not a valid reason.
If you really think about it.
You know, I know you all notice me playing with my glasses up here a lot, but I can't help it. I got these progressive lenses, and I get dizzy and stuff, and I keep trying to focus my head back where I can see straight, but it doesn't work.